next industries that we're falling behind in. That doesn't make any sense. And this is why Trump is doing these tariffs. This is why he's trying to bring all the business that we lost right back to us.
During this period of hyper-globalization or hyper-free trade or huge trade deficits, you've seen us actually fall behind technologically. But the fourth and by far most important ramification of this process is we've seen a real deterioration in the quality of life of our working class people.
Right? Yes.
So the United States, 2/3 of American workers have a high school education only. It's 2/3. So it's not like we're talking about some fringe group on the side. This is the heart of who we are. We have seen these people lose their jobs. We've seen their wages stagnant for 25 years. There was a bump in trade in Trump 1, but we're basically back where we were. You've seen them actually have shorter lives. Angus Deaton and Ann Case did a book.
I remember back when I was a kid, people used to beg for 15 an hour. Now people are just like, now 15 hours is standard. And not only that, the new standard is like 25 an hour. That's the new standard. Everybody's like 23 to 25 an hour. If it ain't that, it almost like, well, if you're a grown ass adult, it almost ain't worth working.
He called Deaths of Despair that demonstrated that these people now live on average about 8 years shorter lives because of alcohol and drugs and suicide. To give you an idea, when I was young, that differential was probably about a year. And now it's 8 years. We've seen they are poorer. We've seen despair increase. We've seen devastation. You don't have to drive very far in America to see devastated communities. All of this, the result of this failed attempt at globalization, this failed attempt at free trade. And another aspect of it is we have seen not only our workers been treated very badly, but the distribution of wealth in America has gone just like this. It's one of the great things about America, for me particularly growing up, but I mean, even you're younger, was this notion that we're all middle class. Now, we weren't always really, but we thought of ourselves.
We definitely pretended it, for sure.
The very, very rich would, they were them and nobody cared about them. And then the very, very poor, we felt sorry for. But most, 80% of us thought we're middle class. And I went to Catholic schools, and we had people with and nobody that was really rich, because Asheville, Ohio, but there were people who were relatively well off, people who weren't, and there wasn't any big difference.
But they all ate at Denny's.
Like they all ate at Denny's. They all went to the same clubs. They all played Little League together. They all thought of themselves as having about the same chance of success, which is an important point. Now what we have, for the first time in American history, the top 1% has more wealth than the middle 60%. It's never happened before. We find, kind of combining these thoughts, and we get this from Angus Deaton, we find for the first time starting in 2000, when this explosion took place in hyperglobalization, we find that American children can no longer expect to live longer than and be richer than their parents. That was what we all thought. We're going to be better off than our parents, and we're going to live longer. That is no longer true. So I could go through one data point after another. If you look, when I was in high school, the top 1% had about 30 times as much wealth as the person in the middle. Now it's 72 times as much wealth. So
this seems like a recipe for social instability and ultimately for revolution. That's what happens in other countries.
Absolutely no question. We have this sense that we're immune. I don't agree with that. And
imagine our government purposely driving the wedge or driving the gap further and further between the rich and the poor. Imagine that our government doing that, and then selling the idea to the American people that, oh, it's the rich people who it's their fault, they don't want to help you and all that good stuff. It's the rich people why they're getting richer and you're getting poorer, when really it's your government's policies. But they're trying to frame it as if it's these corporations. Can you imagine?
These crises that I've talked about, this transfer of wealth, the technology, the slow economic growth, but mostly the effect on our working people. That is why Ronald Reagan was elected. Very beginning of this, we can talk history of that, and it absolutely is why Donald Trump was elected president. Reagan had these so-called Reagan Democrats that we all remember. That was the beginning of those people, because that was when we sort of reached the peak. By the time we got to the 2000s, these people were a movement, this populist movement, and they are the reason that Donald Trump is where he is. And to his credit, Donald Trump talked about this and worried about this issue since he was 35 years old. This is in my opinion, the essence of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's essence is he says we're getting ripped off. Our workers are getting screwed. It's not because they're lazy or stupid. It's because we have a bad system that is hurting them, and it's destabilizing the country. And all of these are data points that kind of make that point. And once you realize that, you realize you have to do something, right? The purpose of the economy, first of all, obviously, is national security. But after that, it's to distribute resources and wealth so that most Americans live the best lives they can live. And we have lost that. We have just plain lost it.
And here's the way: when you send manufacturing out to China and to these places that do it cheaper, that's exactly essentially what they're doing. You're taking away from the wealth of the middle class. And that's what we've been doing for years and years. So now that we're here, it's like, I pretty much see what he's saying. It's like, we kind of set ourselves up for this. It was almost like an organized effort to destroy the free market, to destroy the middle class. And then as these guys were doing it, they were blaming these people who were benefiting off it. Because think about it, yes, these rich people are going to benefit off being able to lower their labor costs. I'm like, if a corporation can take their labor costs to 15 here an hour in America and then be able to get $6 an hour in Mexico, China, Ireland, they're going to do that, and they're going to make more money. So why not give them a way to where they can make their money without one undercutting us, without lowering our wages, but somehow lowering maybe, I don't know, the corporate tax on them or whatever, or giving them lower taxes. This is the whole point of lowering taxes for these corporations, because it gives them more room to profit, so they're not quick to run off to other countries because of wages and corporate taxes.
It hasn't been an accident.
It's like, well, bro, what do you expect us to do? We live in a free market. We just can't smack these people upside the head like an oligarchy. Like, we don't control our millionaires and billionaires. We can't tell them what to do, where to do business. We're not. What are we? China? Russia? No, we're America. We allow them to do what they want. If we can provide the best environment for them to do business, which I suggest we do, then they'll stay here. If we don't, they'll go somewhere else.
It doesn't feel necessarily like we've evolved into this. It feels like we've been guided into this, that this is a result of calculations and an ideology that still exists, most prominently in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, which, let me just say, is a disgusting, dishonest newspaper. But even if you like the Wall Street Journal, they have a very kind of clear ideology, which they've promoted along with almost everybody in Washington, that free trade is the path to prosperity. And then, in fact, it's like a moral imperative. Like, if there's something dirty about abandoning free trade, what is that? Obviously, you know a lot about this since you've lived in Washington a long time.
So I would say, first of all, that I say the Wall Street Journal, they have editorialized against me by name more than 30 times.
I know, by name. You. Oh, me too.
Yeah. So we have that in common too. I say they have the diversity. The editorial page has the diversity of opinion protocol of somewhere between Pravda and the People's Daily.
Yeah,
it is their view, and they keep it. So why did we get to this stage? To some extent, it was kind of misguided. To some extent, it was wealthy people pushing it because it was good for them.
Yeah.
I'm not one who subscribes to the view that it was people trying to hurt America. I think it was, they just didn't care one way or another whether it hurt. They didn't care, for example, who owned America.
Right.
They didn't care what percentage of our global wealth ended up in the hands of our working people. Those were not metrics. What they cared about was price optimization and how much we could consume. And that's the opposite of what people like you and I believe in. Conservatives and a lot of labor Democrats believe we have to worry about values and preserving what's great in America. We're not interested in sort of the materialism of maximizing, optimizing prices and maximizing consumption. And that's more or less where there's a combination of that. There's a combination of this financialization of America, of taking profit out right away so that a few people get very rich, regardless of the effect on others. If you think of the evolution.
Here's the thing, though. Let me be real with you. We talking about that destroys businesses. Like when you take money out the profit up top, I mean, yeah, that's how you destroy a business. If you don't reinvest into your employees, the operations, the production of it, see if you can get a better product, a better production speed. Yeah, that's usually how business fails. So those of y'all who fear these millionaires or billionaires who take advantage of the poor like that, those are the ones that fail in life. Those are the ones that don't go anywhere else, or they end up losing it all. You gotta reinvest.
Evolution, Tucker. It's and we could talk, from the beginning of time and about trade and how it evolved. But for our purposes, you would think of it basically as America really from the early 1800s basically became wealthier and wealthier, largely behind the American system and Alexander Hamilton kind of an idea of tariffs and subsidies in the nation in the nature of canals and roads and the like. But tariffs were a key part. By 1870, we had started to turn surpluses. By 1890, we're the richest country in the world, all right? And it kind of progresses like that. Now we can talk about that back and forth, and those were almost all Republican presidents during that entire period, only 2 Democrats during that entire period between Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. And basically, tariffs were a key tool, and there were ups and downs in that, and we can talk about that if people are interested. But we got to the Second World War. And then we had a different challenge. We had to rebuild Europe. We wanted to rebuild Japan for stability. We wanted to fight communism in the Soviet Union. These were our motivations. And so at that point, we needed a new system, and they developed this new trading system. And the trading system was sort of based on the notion of we'll all reduce barriers, we'll all do better over a period of time. I would say that was at times it was a successful idea, at times it wasn't a successful idea. But by the time we got several decades into it, we started seeing people being more and more industrial policy. And by the 1970s into the late 1970s, we started to see our situation get worse. We started having trade deficits. You'll recall that Nixon in 1971 put tariffs on the whole world in order to decouple from gold. We can talk about that if people are interested. But there were a lot of things that were sort of signals, and that was kind of the peak. By the time we got to Ronald Reagan, as I say, there was already a loss of a lot of jobs. There was an unsettling among our working class people, which, as I say, unlike a lot of places, it is us. It's 70% of it. It is us. And then you found yourself the Berlin Wall fell. There was this notion of the end of history, that for now on everything is going to be better. We're all going to be democracies, and we're all going to have open markets. And there's all this greatness. You can remember
Frank Fukuyama and other morons. Yeah,
they're right. So then you found yourself with Clinton in the 90s. The end of Bush. It's not, because I don't want to be totally partisan. The end of Bush 41, Herbert Walker Bush, and then into Clinton. And we have what I call the trifecta of stupid. All right. We do NAFTA. We do the WTO, the Uruguay round, that big. Yeah. And then the dumbest of them all, we give most favored nation treatment to China. And those things are done more or less in the times of about 10 years.
Clinton for the most favored nation status, that was something that Clinton set it up, but Bush signed it. Is that correct?
No. It passed under Clinton. So this is an interesting fact. In like 1997, I did an article for the New York Times, and you'll recall during the second Clinton election, there was this talk about Indonesian money came into the Clinton.
I remember very well.
Yeah. Well,
Johnny something or other.
Yeah, exactly. Was it the Commerce Department?
Yeah.
I did an article which the New York Times published, that sort of said, well, what's this about? This is not Indonesian money, it's Chinese money. What does China want? They want most favored nation treatment, and they want to get into the WTO. And if they do, there won't be an American job that's safe. So this is 1997. Fast forward, you have this vote. Clinton is pushing it. By the way, it passes with more Republicans than the Democrats. The Republicans are worse on this at that time. A lot of them have kind of learned, and then we have these things pass. So we have this trifecta of stupid, as I call it. And then we have 5 million manufacturing jobs lost. You just see jobs lost. Wages are basically not going up in real terms since then. You know, the rich get richer and the poor.
So when we start turning stuff over to China, it was 5 million? Yeah, that wasn't it. That was not the right decision. They should have just kept manufacturing here if that was going to be the case. It's kind of funny how a lot of these guys ain't really kind of seen how their actions were going to be further down the line, how they were kind of just helping China gain a foothold in manufacturing.
Poor, and a lot of these very bad outcomes for working people, I would say, for the country generally, you can say came at that time. Now, if you say, was the system deteriorating before then? For sure it was, but this was like somebody just putting it on steroids and acted like, I mean, the only thing that they missed about the evolution of economics was human nature, right? Everything else they got right. They just missed human nature.
As always.
Yeah. So then you saw very bad things happen over a long period of time. You got to the point where you had, at 2016, you had President Trump, as I say at that point, had been complaining about this general notion since he was 35, since he was a kid. And he kind of gets the populist movement, he's elected. And then we have, whatever happened in 2020, a COVID thing that ends up affecting our election. And now we are again, because we changed in Trump 1.0 or whatever the computer people say. We changed the way people think about these things. And they didn't really change back much in Biden. To Biden's credit, I think some of his people were very good, but overall they didn't make a lot of decisions to make better what we did, but they didn't make it worse. And now we're in Trump, where we're in a position to actually make substantial changes. But the and I know that's what you want me on here to talk about, but the most fundamental thing is the system has failed America generally, and it's failed our working people dramatically, and that's been going on for in an acute state for at least 25 years.
We're always looking for cool companies that.
Man, I mean, he kind of explained that pretty well. That's why I was silent. I was like, I ain't gonna lie, I ain't got too much to add because my man is cooking it. He's like, okay, he pretty much explained how we even got into the situation, how bad of it is, and kind of how through poor leadership, not really having any foresight into this, we lost hella jobs in manufacturing. Well, 3 ways to balance global trade. I want to get into that part. 3 ways to balance global trade. I like hearing about solutions. And then I believe after this, we're going to go ahead and get into the not conspiracy hour, but we're going to go ahead and get into the social hour. Man, that's going to be a fun one. I know you guys like it. Let's go ahead and take a step back from the seriousness of politics and let's step into some, softer topics, some dating, some social things. But let's get into the 3 ways to balance global trade.
There's basically 3 ways you can get to balance trade. One is the way that Warren Buffett talked about in this article, and it's a wonderful article. I recommend anyone to read it. I would just Google Warren Buffett Squanderville, because he talks about Squanderville and Thriftville, and it's a short article. It's very nice.
2003.
Yeah, it was 2003. And he says what we should do is have export-import certificates. So in order to import, you need an export certificate. So you want to bring in T-shirts, you go to a steel mill and say, okay, fine, you export it, I want to buy that. And that would get you to balance. And I would certainly support that. Mm-hmm. Another way you could do it is you could put, and this is a little more complicated.
Now I want to hear that plan laid out one more time, though. Just so
is have export-import certificates. So in order to import, you need an export certificate. So you want to bring in T-shirts, you go to a steel mill and say, okay, fine, you export it, I want to buy that. And that would get you to balance. And I would certainly support that.
Okay.
Another way you could do it is you could put, and this is a little more complicated, you could put a tax on the money that comes back, this $23.5 trillion, this $1 trillion, so that comes back every year where they buy U.S. assets. You could tax that. So that really wasn't worth $1. It was only worth 80 cents. In that case, there would be less incentive for people to run up these surpluses. That's called a capital access fee, and there are people that have proposed that, and that also would work. And then there's tariffs. So
he says there's like really 3 ways, and the last way is tariffs. But he's like, I ain't gonna lie, that tax one didn't sound like a bad idea. You know, I think the Dems would have rolled over for that one easier than tariffs.
I prefer tariffs, 1, because people understand them. 2, every country in the world has a system set up to deal with tariffs right now. They all have the legality. They all have the process of how to do it. 3, they're flexible. You know, you can move them around based on need to get to your objective of balance. But any 3 of those things would work. And I just think, and obviously the president thinks that tariffs are the simplest, easiest, most understood way to kind of do it. And the objective has to be to offset all unfairness and to move towards, over a period of time, move towards balance and ultimately have balanced trade. If you had balanced trade, you'd have another $1 trillion worth of domestic GDP.
That is also true. I mean, the government can do something, but I'm gonna be real with you. Also, us the people could also do something as well. Always did say it is asinine how some of these companies provide us services. It be like, I ain't gonna lie, it'd be financial or it'd be product services, and they don't hire, but they don't hire Americans. I mean, y'all ever called your bank? You ever called like any type of service that you had that services hella people in America, but you're speaking to foreigners? Yeah. Honestly, I feel like companies like that should be boycotted. We need to put their hands behind their back to bring jobs here. There should be no reason why I'm calling certain customer services or going to certain services and all I'm getting is non-Americans. That just don't make sense to me. But they're doing business here, they're taking American dollars and all that, but you don't hire Americans? Yeah, real with you, like business behavior like that honestly deserves a boycott.
Right. I mean, it would be a huge.
We honestly got to stand up for ourselves as Americans, as U.S. citizens. Like I said, like the liberals scream all day about standing up to these corporations, but they're not going to do it. I just told y'all. I'm like, are y'all going to go against these corporations that undervalue us U.S. citizens and be like, yo, yeah, we're going to stop using y'all because y'all don't hire enough Americans. And when y'all do, we'll go ahead and use y'all because we're benefiting you, but you ain't benefiting us. And that's not cool.
Boom, and most of it would be, or a lot of it would be in manufacturing, and things spun off by manufacturing. And that's what the president is trying to do. He's trying to get us to use tariffs to move towards balance, to get a better distribution of wealth within our country so that working people end up with a higher percentage of the wealth. And we have this economic boom that's going to come by from reducing that huge perennial trade deficit.
I think a lot of people, some people anyway, in Washington for sure, have given up on the idea that America can be a manufacturing power once again.
So I think that's fundamentally wrong. So the first thing they would say is manufacturing doesn't matter.
People still say that.
Oh, there are people. Yeah, we're
outside of AEI or
no. Well, you'd have to. You're in a pretty small group of people that have everything in common except sense. So this is a view. We people who think like I do, and I believe the president in this category, really think manufacturing is essential. One, the wages are better, the benefits are better, people stay in the jobs better for that group of.
And I do want to stand on this point, like, bro, citizens, U.S. citizens, dog, like. We cannot depend on the government to protect our interests all the time. I know we pay into these guys, but obviously we cannot expect them to uphold our interests. There got to be a certain point where we're willing to stand on business and be like, yo, okay, cool. We won't mess with you in this way if you don't benefit us. We won't mess with this company. We won't work for this party. We won't do certain things if you're not working for the American people. It needs to start being like that. We have to start standing up for ourselves as U.S. citizens, because if we don't let the government do it, you've seen how the government acted. They sold us out at a certain time. They're working for us now, but who knows if we'll get a leader that might try to do the same damn thing. This is where it has to be on us.
People that are not going to be brain surgeons and astronauts. Secondly, if you look at manufacturing, it employs about 80% of American engineers. It accounts for about 90% of private sector R&D. It disproportionately accounts for productivity gains. So if you go right down the kind of things you use to measure your economy, more and more, manufacturing throws off about 8 or 9 jobs for every job in manufacturing, and these are good jobs. And finally, you need manufacturing to have innovation. You need manufacturing to defend your country.
Yeah.
Without manufacturing,
really think about that. And he's not lying. Without manufacturing, how do we defend our country? We have to depend on other countries to produce our weapons. And God forbid that the enemy is the other country that produces our weapons, like China, or God forbid that the country that needs to produce our weapons is be real with you, loses control of their government, gets controlled by the opposition. They were really freaking screwed. So yeah, be real with you. Selling out our manufacturing is a huge risk to national security. It doesn't even make any sense why we even allowed it to happen, seeing that this would be the end result, or seeing that that would be an ultimate threat.
Doesn't just mean on this national security issue, it doesn't just mean being able to make bombs and submarines. It means being able to make steel and automobiles and batteries and solar panels. And you have to make all those things to have, and semiconductor chips to wage war or to deter a war from happening, which is probably really our objective. So these people who think we're post-industrial are just fundamentally wrong. And once again, it doesn't bother them who owns America. It doesn't bother them the distributions in the country. And it doesn't bother them that we're falling behind technologically. What they're thinking about is, yes, but we're optimizing consumption.
If it doesn't bother you who owns the country, if it doesn't bother you what's happening to the people.
Optimizing consumption. But here's the problem, though. The only reason why consumption is being optimized because, as we like to point out, the rich is taking home more. The rich is able to buy more. But guess what? Not the American people, because all the business has been taken away from us. I'm gonna be real with you, the manufacturing power, the working power has been stripped from us and given other countries. And these corporations do not hurt from it. Why? Because they can go do their business overseas. Even one of my friends own a clothing company. He could either manufacture here in America or manufacture overseas. Either way, people are going to buy his clothes. Either way. So he can get waxed here, or he can go ahead and go out overseas and get that nice little relief on the manufacturing and then sell it here and get a higher margin. Or we can fix things here, make him be able to go ahead and pay here and get the same profit margin or better. We got to play the game right. Because even the small businesses like that play the same game as the corporations, even the small ones.
Live in the country, then, I think it's fair to assume you have no love for the country. How did people who have no love for the country end up running the country?
Well, that's a good question. One on which I think you and I have a lot of agreement, but on which I profess less expertise than I do on other things. It is, I think a lot of these people, well, some of them just don't like the country because of our history for they'll take up a data point in our history and say that means we're bad. A lot of them take it for granted. But I'm once again, I'm not an expert on that. I certainly agree with your conclusion. It's troubling to me, people who are globalists, not only economic globalists, but sort of geopolitical globalists. They don't realize that there's a force that wants to take over the world. Indeed, there are lots of them. And those forces, if they succeeded, would be very bad for America. A lot of us who were sort of united in this Cold War, particularly in the early years, it kind of brought the country together. We realized we were in a Cold War. I think we're in a Cold War, a second Cold War now. But I think there's just more fifth columnists than there used to be.
A lot more. a lot more. What? How tiny a minority of economists believe what you believe? Like, how out of step are you in Washington right now?
Well, I mean, so I based,
because he's an economist, and this is one of the few economists that's going like, what you mean? Yeah, tariffs could work. Yeah, other things could work, but trust me, tariffs is his favorite one. And I'm finally glad that an economist is stepping out and being like, look, man, the way they're trying to sell this stuff to y'all is not what it is. They're not trying to tax. They're not really trying to tax the middle class. They're trying to bring prosperity back to the middle class.
basically, people say, why do I think the way I think? And some people will say it's because you're from Ashtabula, Ohio, which was one of the places that was decimated, one of a million.
What did they build there in your hometown?
So Ashtabula was a great town. It was a little town between Cleveland and Erie, Pennsylvania. It was a port town. They had steel. They didn't have steel mills, but they had steel fabrication. They made a lot of auto parts. Indeed, at one point, the fiberglass body of the Corvette was made in Ashtabula. One of the famous things about us. They brought in ore from the Great Lakes and then trained it down to Pittsburgh, where they made steel. Obviously, there was agriculture, a lot of agriculture in the area, a lot of machine tools, those kinds of things. It was the sort of stuff that was really, really hit first with the Japanese wave that came on, and which wave was one of the other motivating things in President Trump's mind, because that was the first thing that we all complained about was Japan. And Japanese cars and the like, and then it was all Japanese manufacturing. And once again, I just want to say, because I love Japan, I'm not anti-Japanese at all, but that had nothing to do with economics either. It was they kept their currency low. They had an industrial policy to subsidize all this, and then we sat here and they took our jobs. And now we're seeing that on a far greater scale.
What's your hometown like now?
I cover this in the book. It is now, I have to be careful because I love my hometown, but the poverty rate's probably 35 or 40%.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, the college graduation rate's probably 15 or 20%. And by the way,
I mean, damn, it's crazy too. I can kind of see the same thing that went down here. It's like, bro, it's kind of like, well, the U.S. citizens have been low-key thrown to the side. Most of these kids rather run to the streets than get a job, because as soon as they try to go to a job, I mean, there is none, sadly, especially for these young ones. And I mean, and we can also put accountability on them, because nowadays that they're either influenced to be, content creators that, I'm gonna be real with you, most of them, look, if you ain't never did no consistent work in your life, being a content creator is gonna be one of the hardest things you ever do. Honestly, if you don't have consistency in your life, anything you do is going to be a mountain to climb, because you're just not consistent. And without consistency, there is no success. You can write that down if you want to.
By the way, this is not like we're the bottom of the pit. This is across the country,
the whole United States.
It's everywhere you go. You see these kind of communities. These were wealthy people. They weren't wealthy people. They were people who were well off. A person could have a job, own a car, pay off their house, and support their family. And now they can't do that anymore. And there's this kind of notion that, the other jobs have come back. And indeed, in many cases, there have. And there was just a study by Gordon Hanson out of Harvard and some other people. Other jobs did come back, but they were jobs at the lowest level of healthcare and the like. In other words, did employment come back? Yeah, but the people went from having the kind of job that I described, one that you could support your family and be proud of, to one where you really couldn't.
So one of the first things that prisons do to dehumanize the inmates is take away their privacy, their frequent and random cell checks.
You ain't lying. You ain't lying, Cody. You are not lying. That is very true. Like I said, we are true. Look, the American people are controlled through what we call the scarcity mindset, right? They keep you in a scarcity mindset, keep you in a feeling of lack. So when they flaunt that money in y'all face, y'all quick to do whatever for it. or you're quick to throw away any ideals that you may have held because you're in so much lack. So somebody throws some money in your face, all those ideals just go out the window. Yes. So I always do say, try to operate in a place of abundance, even if you don't got it. Even if you don't got it, man. Abundance is in the mind.
Nation, if there's a huge difference between making something and being a mortgage broker. I'm sorry.
Just look at the dignity of work is what is the key.
But useful work,
useful,
work.
Productive work. Useful, and what I always say, Tucker, is we need a country where parents are hopeful for their children, but where children are proud of their parents. And we're losing that. We need that. We need families where people work and do productive, good work, and they're proud of the work, and they feel better about themselves, and they project that to their children and to the community, to the Little League, to all these kinds of things. These people who worked in these factories in Ashtabula when I was growing up, and some of them, and some farmers, they were proud, hardworking people who, at the end of the day, said, "My dad is this." It was a proud, healthy thing.
What did your dad do?
Yeah, my father was a doctor.
Wow.
My father's an interesting story. The Lighthisers, of course, there's a lot of us that aren't Lighthisers, right? But the Lighthizer strain came over to the United States in 1748. There was a guy named George Lighthizer who came out. He was an illiterate from what is now Germany. He fought in the Revolution. He was 2 years older than George Washington, so he was an old guy. He fought at Trenton. He was at Valley Forge, this guy with, at Princeton, he was on the line with two of his kids who were quite young.
Wow.
All three of them on the line together. He got out after 3 years. Of course, by this point, I don't know what he would have been, maybe 48, which was an old person. The kids.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to the next one because I ain't glad. Next point is even wilder. All right. So, how Washington and big business benefited from the death of the middle class. I mean, come on now. Let's hear it.
And you can hear the bitterness in my voice just as someone who spent his life in D.C., but I just want to say once again that all of these changes were defended and explained by a whole field of academic study and the propaganda that it supported coming from Washington, the free market think tanks, Cato, AEI especially, basically tried to tell you for 40 years as you watched your country die that this was all good.
Yeah.
And I do think they should be publicly shamed for that, if not held accountable in some
cases. It's a combination. And then I want to get back to this question about economists. At some point, it's a combination of that and corporations funding it.
Well, of course. No, they were just the instruments, right?
Who literally benefit from it. And you're like, holy cow, why won't... and then you have to try to chase that through the political system. And so you end up with the Chamber of Commerce of the United States in favor of these things that are quite harmful to the people that I care about and that the president cares about. And they're not against these things because they help those people. That's just not a function. They're against them because the elites, the powers that be, that are benefiting from the system, object to them. Now, on your question about economists, there are a growing number of economists who see this problem. They don't necessarily agree with me on the solution, right? But if you see, Angus Deaton is one who would say we have to reevaluate whether the costs of this thing called free trade were worth the benefits.
Yes.
And that's an important first step. There's Paul Romer, another Nobel laureate, has the same thing. But so you can go through and you can find various ones. There's a guy named Michael Pettis, who's a Carnegie guy, who's thought these things through and he wrote a book 10 years ago called Trade Wars or Class Wars with a guy named Matthew Klein. And it's sort of, so there is some movement, but I don't want to suggest that it's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's maybe a prick, at 1,000 miles away. But I'm hopeful that economists, I've had several of them tell me, well, you're wrong, but you at least realize that, we at least agree with you that things aren't good. There's the beginning of people starting to see it.
Because they I mean, the city had a collective heart attack when you became United States Trade Representative.
I think that's a fair statement.
They had a heart attack. They was like, him, the free trade guy. Wait, him, the guy who's agreed with Trump tariffs? Oh, this can't be good. Yeah, they wanted Trump to appoint somebody that'd be against his policies.
City and the business community.
Yeah, the business community. So you said there were, if you take a system that's been in place for generations, which the current one has been, even if it doesn't work well, even if it hurts your country, changing it is still, or changing anything that's been in place a long time is still a major lift, and it has, turmoil that accompanies it. So can you just be more specific about what sort of turmoil you anticipate as this administration puts into place this new system?
First of all, I have complete confidence that the president will do what he said he's going to do, right? And unlike a lot of politicians, he ran on like real substance and big ideas, and this is probably the biggest of the ideas that he ran on.
Guys, make sure y'all like the video, man. Go to double tap that screen or the 3 dots up there in the corner. Like I said, you can double tap the screen or 3 dots in the corner. Any questions, comments, jokes, or disagreements, go ahead and super chat it in, $2 and up. Go ahead and engage with it and put it to the top of the screen. All right, let's go.
And I think he's going to follow through on his promises, because that's the most important thing. The worst case would be that he doesn't. So what you have to do is put in place tariffs, as I say, to offset not just tariffs. That's a tiny thing. I just keep going back to this point because it's so fundamental. The problem is not just foreign tariffs. That's a tiny part of the problem. But to offset this unfairness. So he has to put those tariffs in place. When you do that, I do not believe you'll have inflation, and we should talk about that in a systemic, fundamental way. But you will have people who have supply chains that are going to have to make adjustments. You've got some things that may go up in price for some period of time. All these kinds of things will have an impact on people in daily life. But I think it'll be short-termed. I call them disruptions. I think it'll be short-termed. I don't think it'll lead to systemic inflation. And I think that people say, well, what should a businessman do? And I say the smarter businessmen and businesswomen are going to figure it out, right? And they get paid a lot of money to do that. And they're going to say, here are the rules. Just on that point, I've had business people, really smart business people, when I would explain this problem, and they would say, Bob, it's the government's responsibility to set up the rules. I'll figure out a way to make money in the rules. That's my responsibility. But I shouldn't be doing this social stuff. That's not my job. My job is to make whatever widgets and to make them profitable and employ my people. And I think that's kind of an important point. It's President Trump's responsibility now. He's the president to set in place a system where these good results for our people will come out. And I think he will. So if you're going to have tariffs to offset this basic unfairness, that will lead to some disruption over a reasonably short period of time. I think you're going to see this manufacturing renaissance, these new jobs, wages go up, right? I mean, this notion that we're not productive because our wages are going up. I'm like, I had this conversation with someone in the White House early on, and this is in the first term, and he was concerned about wage inflation. And I said to him, I said, this is, by the way,
we're paying Americans too much.
Yeah, this is
wild. Concerned about wage inflation. We're paying Americans get too much money out of us, bro. What's going on? Like, damn, you still profiting? Yeah, but they're getting too much money. The hell?
Like a person that had his plane, and I'm playing it out, and I'm sitting. I said,
you can guess who it was.
Yeah, I said we haven't had a raise in the middle class in 15 years, and you're worried about wage inflation.
This is a man with a plane.
I'm praying for wage inflation. This is what I want. Oh, I want these people to make more money and do better and inspire their children and do all the things you do in a community to make the country great. So, anyway, there will be changes. The whole notion at a micro scale, in my opinion, It's to take more resources from the very wealthy and spread them out among the people. So a liberal will say, I diagnose the problem the way Lighthizer does. Let's tax the rich people and give it to the other people. To my idea, that's insanity. What you need to do is devise a structure where these people have good jobs and make lots of money. And that's the way you transfer resources and make the country big. You don't do it by tax policy or things like that.
No, you don't. Yes, you do it by allowing these companies to be able to reinvest into their businesses, being able to have more factories, hire more people, and that's what they'll do. But when you try to tax the rich and give to the poor through what? Social endeavors, that doesn't even help nobody. And let's be real, not everybody will be able to access the money that the government takes from these rich people. We know that because look what they're doing with some of it now. They're sending millions of dollars away, just wasting it. So why wouldn't you want the government to stop taxing rich people so they can decide what they do with? They can decide what they want to do with their money. And guess what? They usually pump it back into the economy by giving your ass a job. Or you can let the government take the money and you don't know when you're ever going to see it.
Yeah.
So what's the president done so far, and what do you anticipate he will do going forward?
So when you think about tariffs, you have to kind of.
I'm real with you, Jackie. You don't sound too smart right now with this point, because if they don't reinvest into their business, right, then why do they have more factories? Why do they have more workers? That's part of reinvesting into your business. That's like if Jeff Bezos didn't reinvest into his business, we wouldn't have all these factories who are hiring all these people. If Google didn't reinvest into his business, we wouldn't have all these data centers popping up all over the place, hiring people. That's part of the reinvestment. That's why y'all don't see it, because if they're getting taxed heavily, they're not going to have as much data centers. They're not going to have much people, according to Google. Like, bro, your basic manufacturer works the same way. When they have more money to themselves, they create more jobs. They create more opportunities to make their production faster. And the part of reinvestment is to make one thing better, if it be your production or product.
To think of in two categories. There are I think like two buckets. There are national security issues which you have to deal with, and if the issue is a sufficient importance to really merit national.
All right, so then you fell into my point. Now you fell into the point. Thank you. You agree with me that we should put tariffs on these countries so we can go ahead and bring back those jobs back here. Because why are they outsourcing? Did you forget? Because of our insane tax policy that the Biden administration was placing on these companies, that it was almost impossible to gain a buck here, where they can go to another country, reinvest over there, make their profit, reinvest, build more factories in another country, giving their people the jobs instead of over here. They only outsource because it is more profitable to them. We can make it profitable here, but y'all want to tax the hell out of them. That's not making it more profitable for them, and they can do whatever the hell they want. So what's the real point here? And if they don't got the jobs here, how are we going to tax them?
Attention, you should do everything you can to solve that problem. If we were in a war, people would say, of course, do whatever you have to, right? Take over, whatever. So he has some things, and in this case, primarily, there's some others, but primarily this fentanyl issue with Canada and Mexico, mostly a Mexican issue. And that's a national security issue. In my opinion, it's not an economic issue, and it should be separated from it. Do you think fentanyl is a sufficiently important crisis to merit doing everything you can to solve it? I believe it is. So for me, doing something in that space makes sense, and the president threatened that, and I think we got good results. That's national security. The bigger question is what, and you can use that tool in other times, and the debate is not whether the tool is appropriate. The debate is whether the national security issue is of sufficient importance to pay that price. So then the other issue is tariffs generally to get us to, I would say, balance. Some people would say fairness. Some people would say reciprocity. But basically to get us to balance, to offset all this unfair, not just tariffs, but unfair practices. And I think what you're going to see on April 2nd is an attempt. You're seeing the U.S.
You know, so crazy though. It is funny when they say, "Oh, these companies don't pay tariffs." I mean, these companies have to raise their prices on the product that they're trying to sell us. That means they're losing out on profit. Yes, they're losing out on profit that they would have got if they didn't have the tariffs on them. So yes, we pay more for the product, but they also lose out on profit margin. I mean, oh wait, hold on. What else is Trump doing? He's saying you can only get a 15% tax. You're gonna get that 15% corporate tax only if you're manufacturing in America. So those countries, like I said, they're losing even more profit now, selling in here, losing even more profit. Yes, that's where they pay. So we both pay.
STR and the Secretary of Treasury, USDA, doing the kind of day-to-day work of Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of Commerce, recommending to the president a series of tariff increases. And now how the form that takes, I don't think it's really been determined yet. I think the direction is, the need is, but I think you're going to have a system that says, here are the issues that are part of this industrial policy that are creating this unfairness. And one of them is, as I say, taxes and value-added taxes. And if people are, so we can talk about that in a second. But and then the notion that the president has is, well, we'll tariff people in order to get them back to whatever we think of as enough to offset their unfairness. At some point, and he's right, of course, but at some point you're going to simplify that, because you can't have 4,000 tariff codes and 180 countries, and what I mean. You would need a supercomputer to decide what. So at some point there's going to be some synthesizing of it to sort of say, okay, if you're in these categories, if you have these things, you get this rate and that. And the important thing for people to understand, I tried to explain to people, it isn't like he's going to say, okay, here's April 2nd. Now going forward, everything is perfect. You're going to have adjustments. We're always going to still be here. There'll be mistakes in the way it's.
Here's the thing, though. This is a great thing that y'all don't realize about America sometimes. We are not a communist country, okay? We are a free market. You have liberties here. So you know what that means? To our detriment, because Russia, China, they control their billionaires. Their billionaires can't really act outside of their country's interest. Our billionaires and millionaires can. They're allowed to outsource and go to another country to do that. I'm telling you right now, there are Chinese companies where their government will not allow them to do that. Russian companies, their country will not allow them to do that because they know it hurts them. They know that. Like, that's what y'all always got to understand here.
It's made, and you're going to have to take care of exclusions and individual people and work it out.
So, but let me finish the point here. Since we cannot control our millionaires and billionaires, we kind of have no choice but to make it easy for them to earn a profit here. Make it as easy as possible. And I always just say, the way to make sure that we don't lose money, or the American people don't lose out on wages, is the government can't take too much taxes. Look, right now with the Biden party, they were trying to find a way to where they can keep American wages up, but while also taxing the corporations heavy. And if you tax a corporation heavy, that's going to bring down American jobs and American wages. So the only way to do this is to keep American wages up, is to bring what the government takes in from these corporations down. And let's be real, like I said, due to all this wasteful and fraudulent spending, man, I ain't gonna lie, the government kind of needs a pay cut.
We did that, and one of the reasons that when the president imposed tariffs in such a grand way, the last time, it never happened before. The reason that it didn't blow up really was that we let the steam out of the balloon when we had to. We did enough so that we took care of urgent problems that might have collateral effects, which were not good. And so you're going to see modification, you're going to see change.
So there are a lot of fine motor skills involved. It's not just...
And you have to recognize that. You have to recognize it. And it's going to be mistakes are going to be made. But the problem is here, we have to do this remedy, and we've got to get there as quickly as we can. And another thing to remember is, in the first administration...
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. Yeah, you're going. That is extremely disrespectful. And you ain't coming back here either, Jackie. You're done. I mean, that's wildly disrespectful to say to somebody. You need to grow the fuck up. Obviously, you're not mature enough to have these conversations.
There weren't that many people who agreed with us.
My bad.
Right? As you say, there was the president who everybody thought was crazy in this area, and me, who they thought was maybe crazier. But the Overton window of acceptability has moved.
Yes.
And so a lot more people understand the crisis a lot. And in fairness, the data has helped us make our case that you have to do this. So I think people are going to be more accepting of it. But you're going to have disruption. You're going to have the people who are benefiting now, benefiting less, and they're not going to like it.
I think that's the best part.
Yeah, it is. There was this thing called concentrated benefits and diffuse payments. This guy Buchanan, who was the economist, and he basically talked about the political system. And he said that sort of things happen when the person who gets the concentrated benefit, he is more motivated to get his way and to push his way through than all the people with diffuse payments. And we've kind of had that system. My hope is that we can kind of reverse that and push back on those people who have had the concentrated benefits and give more of the benefits to the people who until now at least have been relatively quiet and just accepting of a pretty bad hand dealt to them.
Only 3 things are absolutely certain in this.
Well, okay. Well, all right. Well, we see inflation is due to tariffs. I think that's the question that all the libs want answered. So, will we see inflation is due to tariffs? In my opinion, I mean, yeah, I can see it.
I just want to go back to the downside for a second.
Makes sense.
Short-term downside. Of all the potential effects of changing our system to the one that you described, it seems to me that inflation is, certainly as a political matter and an immediate matter, the scariest. First of all, it's really easy to measure. Second, it's obvious. I don't know, it's easy to measure. It's very obvious to people when the things they buy regularly become more expensive. So, I mean, I just want to linger on this for a second. To what extent are we going to see increased inflation because of this?
So Tucker, I think there's going to be disruption, and disruption is going to have some prices go up, but some won't. So let's think about inflation just the way we should think about it. One, inflation is a systemic thing. It's not like your shirt costs more. If your pants cost less, that's not inflation. That's just a more expensive shirt. So the question is whether it's going to systemically raise prices. A lot of people would say, including Milton Friedman, that's really a monetary phenomenon. It's basically monetary policy that's going to dictate whether everything goes up or everything goes down. And this is not going to change monetary policy necessarily. Now, someone might say, it's going to slow down the economy, thus we should lower interest rates. Someone else will say it's going to have inflation, thus we should raise interest rates. So it's kind of a conundrum for the Fed. But set that aside. The notion is that you will increase production in the United States. You will maintain consumption at about the same, and that will not be inflationary. If anything, it'll be deflationary. So that's our idea. There's a model that some economists use called the GTAP model, which, by the way, generally assumes you cannot get economic growth, that you're a full capacity, industrial capacity, and full employment. So if you have a model like that, then that's going to show inflation. But I would suggest that the model is not predictive. And indeed, the St. Louis Fed made the statement a few years ago that the predictive quality of this model is 0.0%. So a lot of the economists are using a model that's unhelpful. But so the notion is you're going to increase production, and that will happen, and that is not going to be inflationary. The idea is that inflation is systemic, not individual prices, so you can't just stack stuff up. The other thing is, in the argument against inflation is...
Hold on here. He said, I might want to listen to my man again, because some of y'all liberals, hey, man, listen to a real economist talk.
And that's going to show inflation. But I would suggest that the model is not predictive, and indeed the St. Louis Fed made this...